Welcome back to another session of Bureaucratic Untangling. I am Professor Tuxie, and today we are discussing a topic that causes economists to break out in hives and tourists to breathe a sigh of absolute relief: the Eurozone. If you were traveling across Europe in the 1990s, your wallet was less of a practical financial tool and more of an international scrap metal collection. You needed francs to buy a croissant in Paris, marks for a beer in Berlin, lira for a coffee in Rome, and pesetas for a train in Madrid. Every time you crossed a border, you had to visit a currency exchange booth. You could easily lose 10 to 15% of your money's total value just by traveling through 3 countries, entirely due to exchange fees and shifting rates. The European Union, in its infinite pedantic wisdom, decided this was horribly inefficient. They believed that a single market needed a single currency. And so, with the signing of the Maastricht Treaty in 1992, the groundwork was laid for the euro. But creating a new currency for dozens of fiercely proud nations is not just an economic challenge, it is a diplomatic minefield. Take the physical banknotes, for example. When designing the paper euro, the European Central Bank faced a massive problem. If they put the Eiffel Tower on the 20 euro note, Italy would immediately demand the Colosseum on the 50, and Greece would riot if the Parthenon wasn't on the 100. To avoid starting a civil war over paper money, the EU hired an Austrian designer who came up with a brilliantly boring solution: fictional architecture. The bridges and windows on euro banknotes represent different architectural periods of Europe: classical, Romanesque, Gothic, Renaissance, but they do not actually exist anywhere in the real world. Nobody could be jealous, because nobody owned them. Well, that was true, until the town of Spijkenisse in the Netherlands decided to be spectacularly pedantic. They hired an architect to actually build exact scale replicas of the fictional bridges over a local canal, painting them in the exact bright colors of the banknotes. As an academic who appreciates weaponized bureaucracy, I must applaud that level of spite. It is truly magnificent. The coins were a bit easier. The EU decided on a compromise. One side of the coin features a standard map of Europe, and the other side is left blank for each country to mint their own national symbols: an Irish harp, a German eagle, a Spanish king. But regardless of what is on the back, they are legal tender everywhere in the Eurozone. Today, the Eurozone is a very exclusive club. Out of the 27 European Union member states, exactly 20 of them use the euro as their official currency. The bouncer of this VIP club is the European Central Bank in Frankfurt, which sets interest rates and tries to keep 20 different economies marching to the same beat. But what about the other 7 EU countries? Why aren't they using the euro? This is where the bureaucracy gets truly delicious. Let us start with the legal refuser, Denmark. When the Maastricht Treaty was being negotiated, the Danish public was highly skeptical of giving up their beloved krone. To get Denmark to sign the treaty at all, the EU had to grant them a legally binding opt-out. Denmark is entirely exempt from ever having to adopt the euro. However, Denmark is deeply integrated into the European economy, so they did something rather amusing. They participate in something called ERM2, the European Exchange Rate Mechanism. By law, the Danish Central Bank keeps the value of the krone pegged almost exactly to the value of the euro. It barely fluctuates. For all intents and purposes, the Danish krone is just the euro wearing a Viking helmet. They kept their national pride but surrendered their monetary independence anyway. Brilliant. Now we move on to the pretenders. According to EU law, every new country that joins the European Union is legally obligated to eventually adopt the euro. It is not a choice. It is a condition of membership. This applies to countries like Sweden, Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. But here is the masterpiece of European bureaucracy. While they are legally required to join the euro, there is absolutely no deadline. None. To adopt the euro, a country must meet strict economic criteria, including participating in that ERM2 exchange rate mechanism we just talked about for 2 consecutive years. But joining ERM2 is voluntary. So, Sweden, a country that could easily adopt the euro tomorrow if it wanted to, simply refuses to join ERM2. They intentionally fail the entry requirements on purpose, year after year, decade after decade. It is the geopolitical equivalent of refusing to take your final exams so you never have to graduate. The EU knows what they are doing. Sweden knows what they are doing. Everyone just politely pretends they are working towards it. But the story of the euro doesn't end at the borders of the European Union. We also have the microstate exceptions. Monaco, San Marino, Andorra, and the Vatican City are tiny sovereign states surrounded by Eurozone countries. They are not in the EU. However, because their economies are so deeply intertwined with their neighbors, who all switched to the euro, they had to adapt. The EU signed special monetary agreements with them. They are allowed to use the euro as their official currency, and they are even allowed to mint a very small number of their own euro coins. Because they are so rare, a Vatican euro coin with the Pope's face on it is worth significantly more to a collector than its actual face value. And finally, we reach my absolute favorites, the pirates. Montenegro and Kosovo are not in the European Union. They do not have a special monetary agreement with the European Union. They did not ask permission. They simply decided unilaterally to use the euro. In the late 90s, to stabilize their economies, they started using the German mark. When Germany switched to the euro, Montenegro and Kosovo simply swapped all their marks for euros. The European Central Bank was, and still is, completely scandalized by this. You cannot just use someone else's currency without a treaty. The ECB sends them strongly worded letters. But what can Frankfurt actually do? They can't invade them and confiscate the cash. They can't stop people from handing over paper money for a loaf of bread. So, the EU just severely frowns at them, and the piracy continues. The Eurozone is a fascinating, wildly complicated political experiment. It is a currency designed to force unity, filled with legal opt-outs, deliberate loopholes, special treaties, and blatant piracy. It is not perfect, and it has weathered massive financial crises, but it remains one of the most powerful currencies on Earth. Join me next time, when we dive into the murky, hilarious waters of EU standardization. From the forced adoption of the USB-C charger to the persistent, completely ridiculous myth of the straight banana. Until then, keep your documents stamped and your regulations strictly observed.